We're live. Hi, Dena.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome
Morning,
back.
Dena.
So good to see you again.
Thank you. To you too. I'm really thrilled to be back. Thank you.
A lot of exciting things to talk about today. And I think that I know I'm still sharing my screen here, so we'll wait until we get launched here. So allow people to join up. We have a few people that are joining now.
But Dena, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, Dena, I'm so excited that you're joining us from DC area, as you were mentioning earlier, right?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great place to be. It's interesting last weekend to be here in the nation's capital on 9/11 for all the memorial services and all of that. Just going through DC and just seeing these pockets of people gathered and honoring the past. Yeah,
that memorial is beautiful. That's amazing. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about that as we're waiting for a couple of minutes before we start, because I'm sure that obviously you had a unique experience being in DC during that time. And so what was it like compared to, you were in Denver in the past and going through that particular event? So what was really different about being in DC?
Well, interestingly, 20 years ago, we were on sabbatical in Annapolis, Maryland. So we were only about 45 minutes away from the Pentagon at the time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so kids were in school, ran and got them and brought them home. And then we didn't know what was going to happen. Like the rest of the world, we were waiting to see how it was all going to unfold. So, yeah, it was very different, though, in terms of the memorials that have happened each year being in Colorado, because we were only here for 10 months, but it happened to overlap 9/11. And we saw the changes that happened very quickly in terms of security and all of that. But then spending the next really 20 years after that in the Colorado area, these memorials were very, it's nothing like it is here. I can't even, there's no comparison.
Much more close to the heart, I imagine.
Yeah. And also I happened to be up in, I was in New Jersey the later in the weekend, and just the amount of places that have memorials to this many people because they're all neighboring communities to, they're the bedroom communities, so to speak, right? Like people, that's where people live, and then they commute into the city. And so being in Hoboken and Jersey City, and these are places that had quite a few people who were killed in 9/11. So those memorials, it felt like it was everywhere in this area, in this region.
Yeah. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so I think that I think we can talk more about that as far as during our discussion here. So I'd love to revisit that. But so let's go ahead and kick things off. So welcome everyone to the People Strategy Forum. We're a mastermind of leaders dedicated to creating workplaces where people thrive, employers reward, and customers love. And so we are a forum that in podcast now that we're getting ready to launch. We get together every week, and we talk about issues that can expand and improve the lives of others through HR professionals and leaders out there. These are important topics to move us forward, and which brings us to a very special guest that we have today, Dr. Dena Samuels, that I'll introduce here in just a moment. First, just a little bit about us. So my name is Sam Reeve. I'm the CEO of Comp Team. We're a compensation consulting company, and we also deal with talent management issues and working on creating those workplaces where we're inspiring performance, so companies can better attract the best talent, retain their top performers, and motivate their people going forward. So it's a very important practice, which I find very rewarding. And then, of course, I have my colleague here, Shar Miller, who is one of the founders of Rocky Mountain Health Advocates, and she's also a talent expert. comes with years of experience in HR, and we're so pleased to have her expertise here on the forum.
Yes,
So
thanks for having me. And I just want to mention Daniel here was asking where Jules was at, but she's on a photo shoot or she's our movie star. So
yeah.
So she's working on another assignment right now, but she'll be back.
Yeah, she should be returning back to us next week. So Jules is in Hollywood, and she's a on-screen presence coach, which is how I got met her to help us show up better here on the forum, and also improve our up our level of expertise here when it comes to being on camera and audio. And so she's helped us tremendously there. And she's also, she's, like I mentioned, a producer in Hollywood, and also an actress. And so she has been on scene for the past 2 days doing a shoot, and she should be returning next week to help us with this. So yeah, she's been sorely missed. So we'll see her soon.
Yeah.
Great. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Dena Samuels. And so Dr. Dena Samuels here is a mindful and diversity, equity, inclusion author, speaker, and consultant. She has written many books, which I'll show you here: The Mindfulness Effect, also talking about the Matrix Reader, and the Culturally Inclusive Educator. So a lot of very important and poignant topics that we need to hear about today. As we all know, there's been a demand in the workplace by our candidates out there they want to work in places that are more diverse, have greater amounts of equity, and they're bringing in a bunch of different people. And I think that's one thing that this work at home movement that has happened over the past year and a half is brought to us, is a more globalization. Now, and companies can hire across the globe for those knowledge workers. They can get the best talent anywhere and bring in more diverse individuals into their group, people that have had different backgrounds, that come from different cultures, that have different preferences, that have those different experiences that can improve performance of our companies and enhance the lives of all of us and our customers. So I'm very pleased to have Dr. Dena Samuels here today. So Dena, can you tell us a little bit about how you started and got started in this effort, and what brought this this passion towards diversity and equity and inclusion?
Thank you. Thanks again. Thanks to both of you, Sam and Shard, for having me here. Again, it's lovely to be here. When I started, it really was, I was invited as a sociology student back in the day, a master's student. I was invited to teach at the university, and I said, well, I can't teach at the university. I have a master's, I don't have a PhD. And they said, no, we want you anyway, which was wonderful, because it was sort of the first time that I felt like, oh, I felt like this is my journey. This is the beginning of my journey. And so that's how it happened. But also from a personal standpoint, thinking back in my own past, I had a really traumatic childhood. And when I looked around, I was actually born in South Africa and spent time in Ethiopia. And it turns out, I had a family that was, well, let me put it this way, that the kindest faces to me tended to have much darker skin than mine, right? In the surroundings where I was. My godfather was also from Ethiopia and all of that. And so when we moved to the United States, when I was really young, I think that actually shifted how I saw the world. We always had people coming and going in our home in the Boston area who were from all over the world. And so I think that really shaped how, what was interesting to me, what was important to me. And as a Jewish person, understanding what it means to be, challenged in a Christian culture, what that feels like and what that, so all of these pieces kind of came together in terms of what I decided to do, I think, with my career. And then very specifically, also understanding when I started teaching, I was invited to teach social theory. And one of the things I taught was race theory, and I also taught women's theories, like feminist theory as well. And so when I was teaching about race theory, people kept asking me about my whiteness. And my students were asking me, they were asking me all these questions that I was like, well, I know it's important and I get it, but I don't know how to answer the questions. And so of course that opened up a whole floodgate of doing more research and more studying and more learning and all of that. And really that kind of shifted my career into really doing this and living a life that's more multicultural and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, and it's such an important topic. I mean, we've talked about this before, Dena, about the biases that we bring. All of us have biases and so forth, and we should be aware of that, and then also and understand that we have sensitive. It's a difficult topic because there's biases that we're aware of and those we're not aware of, right? And on a regular basis, we can be, I guess, offensive to others because of our past history. I mean, you mentioned that in your past history, I mean, those people that you learned to trust, those that you felt the most love from, were from a different race, and in a lot of situations where we have segregated areas where people are surrounded by their own race, those are the people that they learn to love and trust. And then when they're put into a different environment, they have to figure out how to be successful in that environment. And being very agile and being open and aware of yourself is quite critical, right?
Absolutely. I love all of the things that you just said. I mean, everything you just said is completely backed by research too. I mean, it's beautiful the way you articulated that. It's absolutely true that we are more segregated today than we were during the 1960s in terms of our housing, in terms of many different sectors of our industries or areas that we think about. And so if that's true, then we're really not building relationships across social differences. And so when we get into those situations where we are, talking to somebody or interacting with somebody, and think about that in terms of not even just in your home, but in the workplace, we don't know what we don't know. And so a lot of people say, well, I'm nice to everybody. And so if I'm nice to everybody, of course I'm culturally inclusive. And my own personal research with national research, robust studies and all of that finds that that's just not the case. We can't just be nice and think we're doing cultural inclusion. We actually need some learning, again, to learn about what we don't know. Yeah, and what we haven't been exposed to. It's not about blame or shame with anyone. It's not saying you should know, because how would you know? Yeah. Right? You're talking about intergenerational, we pass down from one generation to the next. We pass down these stereotypes that we think are true. And so we're reacting literally based on those stereotypes that are so old. And we don't know to even challenge those unless we do some studying and self-reflection and all of the things and learn the specific strategies. I mean, that I teach, but there's lots of people out there who do this kind of work, who have studied what kind of strategies will actually work.
Right. So I think that it's clear to say, as to all our listeners out there, that I think one foundational truth we should all embrace is that a lot of the things that we've learned from the past are simply not true today. And then, and we should open ourselves to exploring the truths. And so what are the first steps that leaders can take in their organization to help their managers and their employees kind of explore this realm?
So, I mean, the best thing to do, I should I tell you about a little bit about the programs that I offer, or like?
Oh yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to hear that.
Great.
Good way to do it. I mean, because really, before I get to the program, I just want to say that leaders in this world, like if you're HR or you're any kind of leader in an organization, the first thing is to pay attention, to realize and recognize how important doing this work is for everybody. It turns out that the companies that are doing more, that are more diverse, but are also focused on cultural inclusion, are actually doing better in the marketplace. So there's every reason to make sure we're doing this and doing it well. A lot of people are doing it and not doing it quite so well. So one of the programs that I offer, and I share it because it came out of people not doing it quite so well. I'm constantly getting calls from clients who are saying, I tried to have this conversation in my workplace because, hey, I was tasked with it. Maybe a senior leader said to me, hey, you're HR, so you should do it. Or you're a person of color, you should know how to do this. And when it comes down to it, neither of those are necessarily qualifications for actually doing this well. Having these kinds of conversations that can be volatile. When you think about the ways that we interact with each other, these are very real. We all come into whatever space we're in. We come in with a particular race, a particular social class, a particular gender, a particular sexual orientation, and so we're all coming with all of these social identities and ways of being that we've typically been taught. And so you get this combination that can sometimes really go sideways. So what happens is, I'll get a call and a client will say, and a client could be an HR person who's saying, my company, I tried to do this, I was asked to do it, and it not only went sideways, I think I did more harm than good. And, my heart goes out because I say, bless your heart for even, attempting to, but that it really takes some knowledge, some skills for how to have these conversations effectively. So with that said, I have this I happen to have a program that was developed for people because I firmly believe I can't be everywhere at all times, right? People I feel like should be thinking about what would it be like to be qualified to have these conversations, how, that you can have these conversations yourself. If you have the understanding of how to do that. So again, the program I call FED, FEDD, which is Facilitating Effective DEI Discussions. So it's fed, and I think about it as get fed, right? We want to get fed, right?
Right.
Especially around these. And so it's basically a train the trainer certificate program. So I offer a certificate. It's an 8-week program. I work with individuals, but also with small groups or even bigger groups. I just did a group that was almost 20 people who went through this program, and they just, at the end of the day, they felt like, oh, I didn't even know. I didn't realize what I didn't know going into having these conversations. So we talk about, not only facilitation skills, but very specific facilitation skills around having these particular discussions. And so we talk about bias, we talk about microaggressions, we talk about how do you preempt resistance that can come up when, somebody says something, and, what do you do? How do you handle that as the facilitator? So that's one of the programs I'm offering now that people are very excited about. Yeah.
So Shar, you're on mute there.
Dena, I was just going to say, I think that's outstanding. I have worked with very large organizations, large healthcare systems. And often what we do is we lean on these learning management systems that talk about diversity and inclusion, and they're very textbook discussions. Now as a business owner, we having these conversations and being open and honest and not being afraid as a Caucasian middle-aged female to open up the dialogue in regards to diversity, inclusion, and that goes for everything, including race as well as disabilities, And having these open discussions are so crucial, and my employees really appreciate it. As a matter of fact, in my company, it is the most diverse location. It is the most diverse location that actually represents the community the best. That happens to be in one of the toughest areas in Denver, is actually the location that is doing the best. And I think that the community is acknowledging the fact that our employees represent the faces and the people of that community, and that's why they feel more trusting to come up and talk with us. So it's excellent to have those conversations. Sam, what were you going to mention?
So, no, I think that's a case in point. But when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's break that down. I mean, when we talk about diversity, we often are thinking about race and gender and sexual preference and so forth. But what does that all include? I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can think about inclusion from a lot of different backgrounds. Yes. So how would you define that?
So I do think I do pull DEI apart, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think it's important to do that. And by the way, I'll add the word belonging at the end of that as well, because I think that's ultimately what we all want. And so doing this work, you start off with thinking, most people just mush all those words together. It's important to pull them apart, to tease them apart. Diversity, I think about, we need to think intersectionally. Diversity can't just be about race or ethnicity. We do need to think about sexual orientation. We need to think about, as I was saying before, gender, social class, disability, your age. All of these pieces are so important in terms of, we don't want to leave anything out. Right. We know, even like looking at age in the corporate culture right now, or even in nonprofit organizations, there's such a difference between what millennials are bringing to the table and how they want their organization, like how they want their workplace to look, compared to people who are maybe in a different generation and are looking and are saying, well, you as a millennial need to fit into what we've already created. And millennials are saying, no, back in the day, people would be in an organization for their entire career. And now millennials, it's 2 years. Most often 2 years. That's really what the data is showing now. And we're going to have more and more. We're already, I think, almost at 75% of our workforce is millennials. So for folks who are saying, well, they need to change to us, it's like that you're going to miss the boat. You already have, if that's the mentality. So we need to be thinking about, what does that look like? So when you ask about diversity, we got to think about all these different ways, right, of thinking. I think about diversity as representation, who's in the room. When I think about cultural inclusion, I think about how are we in the space together? How are we in the room? And when I say room, it could be a Zoom room, it could be in person, it could be whatever it is. Who's here? Who's in the organization altogether? Who's there? So representation is first, diversity. Cultural inclusion, how are we bringing folks into the space? And how welcome do they feel? How accepted do they feel? How excited do they feel to bring their whole selves into the space? Because we know when they're able to bring their whole selves and not leave part of themselves at the door because it's not acceptable to bring it in, I've got to pretend or hide some aspect of myself. We're not getting the whole person. When we don't get a whole person, we're losing out on innovation, creative strategies, problem solving, all of the things that we want in a good organization. So that's the cultural inclusion piece. And then the equity piece is going deeper, looking at the systems that are in place in your organization that are making it more likely that some folks will succeed or have access to resources or have access to whatever you're offering than others. And so really looking at those systems, the best way I can think about that is, if you think about the space you are in currently, like whatever room you're in, if somebody were in a wheelchair, would they be able to be in the same exact space as you right now? Just think about where you are. If you're in a private home because you're working from home, maybe that's not possible. But when we look at equity, we're thinking about the systems that are in place that are making it more accessible for some and less accessible for others. And how do we balance those scales? How do we make it most inclusive so that in your organization, there's lots of corporations even out there that are still in buildings that have not been upgraded by the ADA standards. So that's one piece. There's also like, what are your policies? What are your practices in your organization that are making things inequitable versus equitable? Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you were talking about that. I do want to bring up, I do have an employee in a wheelchair. It's interesting you bring that up, and he has restrictions not only being in a wheelchair, but also utilizing his hands. And so, you know, he invited us as owners to actually visit with the state agencies and him to really look at the work environment that he's working in, to make sure that we installed certain pulleys, certain features like such as our printer and how he can utilize his hands to operate that. And so instead of shying away from it, he included us as part of the problem solving solution. And in addition, to really look at the technology that we have, so that if he goes to any other location, that he can utilize the technologies with his disabilities. And I have to tell you, that went miles and miles with this gentleman, so that his employee engagement is off the charts. He's been a huge advocate for all of the inclusiveness and the belonging, because we've demonstrated that we really care for him and value his expertise, and that we can be as inclusive as possible. So in regards to that, it's really increased our productivity and our operational efficiencies, just because that we've provided that role modeling in our company.
Yeah, that's so important. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I think it's important that we empower our employees to become advocates for themselves and teach them how to speak up for their needs. Just this morning, I have a discussion with my wife, because she's a teacher, and she was telling me, and she's a support person. She goes in and helps students with special needs. They may be suffering from ADD or dyslexia or autism or whatever it may be. And she goes into a classroom, and she had a young teacher that came in, and that teacher was, they were teaching English or whatever the topic might have been. And he would keep on, when she would speak up, he would interrupt her and say, well, no, this is the way, because he wasn't understanding where she was coming from. And knowing that there's different cognitive styles. And so he was coming from his background of being out of college, how to teach English in a certain parameter. And she was coming in from it from the aspect that some of these kids don't understand the jargon or that concepts. And so she was translating it in a different way as she's done for years. And so, but she felt like she was being beaten down by this instructor, because he was constantly, cutting her off. And so I think that it's important we teach our people to be advocates for themselves, to be able to have those crucial conversations with other people, whether it may be their manager or colleagues, on how to understand that frame set, whether it's on cognitive differences, cultural differences in gender or race. And so your program helps with that, right, Dena?
It does. I want to elaborate a little bit, if I could, on what you just said about getting people to advocate for themselves. When we think about it that way, we don't necessarily want to put the onus on folks to speak up if they have a problem. We want to be proactive before they even have a problem by asking the questions. So when you say teach them how to self-advocate, this is, I'm guessing maybe you were referring to asking those questions consistently. What do you need now? Have things changed? Do you need, how can we make you feel more included, like you belong, like this is your home away from home? That's what we want, because at the end of the day, we're going to get more from an employee who is able to do that, as I've mentioned before. So really, to me, that teaching them how to self-advocate really translates in my mind to, let's continue to ask them, how are we doing? How are, having that feedback loop and making sure that they understand that they can trust that if they say, well, I kind of do need this, or this might make it better, that not only will you consider the shift, but you're asking for it, and you'll do everything in your power to make that happen.
Right.
That to me, now you're talking about what Shar just mentioned, like that idea of having an employee for life. It's like, I'm so excited about this company. I'm going to bring my best because this company deserves it. I'm excited about giving it my all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I get what you're saying, because the gentleman that I just mentioned, I found a lot of our employees were trying to help him in ways like if he dropped a pen, or if he needed to try to maneuver his wheelchair in certain spatial areas. He basically demonstrated, no, I don't need everyone's help right now. Okay, I can pick up my own pen off the floor. I can, get my own, let me be independent. And, that's the emotional intelligence for people to acknowledge that, no, he wants to be independent on his own. And he's very, very vocal about it.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I was going to mention with my bilingual employees, of really from a career mobility standpoint, to really, leverage the fact that they're bilingual, and how can we assist our other employees that are not bilingual, and utilize that power, that wonderful gift of having that bilingual aspect, and supporting the other employees that don't, and how can we help them learn. So putting that person in a position of influence and coaching, I think, has been very powerful in that employee's engagement as well.
Mhm.
So what are some of the first steps, Dena, in your program? I mean, I've had many clients that in various different industries, some that, like, for instance, the offshore oil, where they have problems with having enough females on the rig and certain locations and so forth, or in certain areas. And then I've had situations where I've had technology companies where their recruiters have been biased on who they're bringing on. They're not thinking of the cognitive differences and the skill sets they're bringing into the role, such as people that are suffering with autism or experience with ADD or their different thinking styles, and they may not show up well in an interview. And so but they can be extremely high performers in certain disciplines and talents and so forth that they love. And so what are the first steps that you help leaders understand how to be more inclusive with these different groups?
So some of the ways of thinking about this is, when you think about your organization in general, you want to think about what is available. How are you? Where is your starting point? A lot of times when people want to jump into having to, to figure out what these steps are, they don't know where they're starting from. So one of the programs I also offer is an equity audit. And what an equity audit is, and I don't really love the word equity because it sounds like I'm going to come in and, whatever, but really it's an exploration, right? It's learning more about where are you right now, right? How are you doing in terms of your policies, your outward facing material, your promotional materials? How do you present yourself in the world? Does it feel like it's, a place where people with diverse, with traditionally marginalized identities are going to feel like they want to come, right? So, it's partly looking at that. It's also looking at the inward facing materials. So your policies and practices within the organization. And I find that people who aren't sure where to start, that's a great starting place, because then they have, what I do is I'll come in and I'll look at these materials, I'll look at the website, I'll talk to people, and then I usually will create a survey, which that's my background also is in survey development, that would be very specific. It would be a short survey for the organization. So we get some feedback from people who are anonymous feedback from people who are living in the organization, with the organization. They're there, most often on a daily basis. So they can say how inclusive they feel the organization is. And then from there, going into some interviews with some key stakeholders and to see, what are you seeing? What would you like to see? What's working well? What could be shifted? What do you feel? So really getting the lay of the land from the key people in the organization, putting it all together in a report with lots of recommendations of here's what I would, here's how I would recommend, as having done this almost 25 years now. Here's what I would recommend you do moving forward. And so that to me is a great starting place if folks don't know what to do. I think training is always a good step, right? With a qualified trainer with a lot of experience who knows this stuff, like myself, but there's lots of others out there who do this great, do great work as well. So I think all of those pieces, I think really paying attention and putting some, oftentimes we've got an agenda to get through during our day on a daily basis for, 360, 24/7, 365. And we're like, yeah, I know I should be doing that. But the idea is get some meetings on the calendar, bring some folks together in your organization who are interested in this topic. And once you set a meeting, then you've already scheduled time for it. And maybe it becomes a monthly meeting. And so therefore you're having these conversations and trying to figure out what do we want to do to move forward. And, I'm also, as a consultant, and as I said, I've been doing this with organizations, corporations, campuses for so many decades, several decades at this point that, I can help with that process for sure.
So let's back up. You mentioned about your equity audit, and in doing this assessment, do you often find certain themes? Where do companies, if they need to lift under what rock, what are the areas you typically find the most problems?
So, that actually, believe it or not, it varies organization to organization. So it's not like all my recommendations are boilerplate. It's very much geared toward, here's what I'm seeing. I kind of analyze the data and then synthesize it and present it in a way where I'm not going to give you pages and pages and pages of notes. I'm going to give you, a readable report. And so it's very much focused on what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from your people, right? And I know what questions to ask is really the bottom line. And so I'm able to elicit what I need to be able to really assess how they're doing. What I've seen often is sometimes they've got their website in good condition because they know that their outward facing material is supposed to be, look diverse and all of that, which is not a bad thing, right? But if it's not mirrored, if it's not in alignment with what's actually going on in the organization, sometimes I will see that disconnect.
Yeah.
And because when people actually deal with the people in the organization, they're getting a different feel from what they're seeing on the website, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does. I often talk about that a lot when we're putting together pay philosophies and talent philosophies for companies. Is what is the candidate seeing versus what the people, your employees, are experiencing. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. So that's hugely important. Now so as far as putting together these sessions that you were talking about, you're encouraging companies to just start talking about it and talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and putting together groups. But this can be really intimidating. For those people that have they know that they have biases, they're aware of that. Just in having this conversation with you right now, I'm sure I've made several gaffes and just talking about this topic. But how can you create a session to where people feel psychologically safe and are not triggered by some of the conversations that go on in that discussion?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I love, Sam, your self-reflection. And that to me is you're being vulnerable in that way is such an amazing leadership trait. I think most people think, well, I've got to know how to do it. This is probably the number one thing I find that I find most problematic is I'll get leadership to say, please do some trainings with those folks over there, right? My people do some, and I'm like, what about you? Where are you going to be, right? Are you going to be in the space too? And they're like, I don't want to, they're afraid to show their vulnerability. What you just exemplified is how powerful it is and actually how it's actually an inclusive practice to be able to say, for me, I come into spaces when I talk, especially when they're multiracial, I'll talk about my whiteness. I'll say, well, as a white person, blah, 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 so that it's not, it's a way of saying, I get that I'm seeing the world through a white lens, right? That I'm not pretending that I know what it's like to live in skin, you know, of a BIPOC person, Black, Indigenous, or other folks of color. Like, you know, I am coming from this particular lens. And I think that that's a very good, that's a really great practice in terms of calling people into the conversation. In terms of feeling like you're creating a safe space, I mean, I have a whole discussion about what safe means anyway, because, you know, it's what might be safe for someone may not be safe for someone else, based on their own experiences, based on their own social identities, et cetera. So yes, I love that, Daniel. Vulnerability is definitely a strength, for sure. If you know anything about Brene Brown's work, for example, it's really, it's right on target there. And she's done years and years of research on it. Yeah. All that to say, I do think that, you know, coming into these conversations from a place of, I don't know everything, right? Like, not feeling like you need to be the expert, but at the same time, navigating there's so many, you know, this is part of what I do in my certificate, Train the Trainer certificate program, the FED program, is I talk about the fact that to create a safe space means that everybody needs to be able to show up as they are, as I've continued to say, right? But also that it's not anything goes. A lot of times people will say, well, I can just let it all hang out, you know, and be, you know, loosey-goosey about all of this stuff. Well, that, you know, in some senses, we want to call people in, we want to have them bring their whole selves into the space, but they also need to take responsibility for what they're saying. So I put in place guidelines that these are really important to me. I call them guidelines for effective community conversations, right? And so having those kinds of guidelines means some of them are things like being respectful and, you know, some of the basic things you would imagine, but there's also some stuff maybe you wouldn't imagine about, like, comfort is overrated, that I'm not trying to make everybody comfortable when I come into a space. I'm trying, because when we're comfortable, we're not necessarily paying as close attention. We're not on alert at all, right? We don't want you, I call it a difference between leading edge and bleeding edge, right? We want you to the point where you're alert, you're aware, you're conscious of what's going on around you, but you're not bleeding edge where you're panicked. Do you get the difference there?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So this idea of leading edge is the idea that you're leaning into the conversation, right? Without coming from this place of fear, anxiety. There might be a little bit of fear and anxiety, and that, you know, that's fine. That's probably normal. But if that's what you're leading with, and that's the majority of what you're doing, you probably want to learn some skills before you go into that space, just so you feel confident. I mean, it's a great point that you bring up, Sam, is that, you know, having, for example, this certificate program actually gives you more confidence than you would have had. It doesn't mean I'm going to be able to eliminate all your fears and concerns and all of that. I wouldn't want to, but I want you to be, you know, conscious when you come into a space and noticing who's speaking maybe more than their fair share and who's not speaking and why. It may be that they're shy, or maybe they're feeling silenced in some way. So paying attention, navigating those spaces, it's not easy. I'm not, you know, it does take, I've been doing it for so many years. I still find it challenging to have those conversations, and yet I can't imagine doing anything else with my life. You know, it's important.
Yeah, I'm so glad I'm definitely so glad you're doing that and providing this advice to those leaders and companies out there. But there's one thing as far as helping groups come together and a teaming effort is one thing, but in situations like Shar has and many other listeners out there, where they have their staff interacting with a diverse clientele, where they can come from many different races and preferences and so forth. I mean, how do we help those outward facing people without the other part of the group there to better interact with those customers?
So for example, if they're on a call with a client, customer, whatever, who they're aware that they're coming from a different social identity, social group membership, or maybe multiple social group memberships that differ from yours. Is that what you're asking?
Right. I mean, we've talked about the certain aspects of how people can bring in microaggressions in their discussions and so forth. Yeah. And so, of course, as business owners out there, we want to make sure that our clients have a positive experience and that our people are trained so they're not talking to our customers with microaggressions or aspects of it. They're trained so that they're thinking about diversity and inclusion when they're talking to customers.
Thank you for bringing that up, because it turns out that, there was some, I would say, bad press, I guess. I don't know how else to say that, in the last probably 5-7 years around how diversity training doesn't work and it's terrible and all of that. I don't know if you all were aware of that, but if you look, you look it up and you'll see there's a bunch, and it turns out when the researchers have gone in, I've written about this in I think probably several of my books, that the researchers went in to see what's going on here. And it turns out most often it was because of microaggressions that the trainer made. Yeah. And so then they lose credibility. They didn't know what they didn't know. They weren't researched enough. They didn't, So when we come from humility, I'm considered an SME, a subject matter expert in this area. That doesn't mean I'm never going to microaggress. And in fact, I expect to be microaggressing for the rest of my life, not because I want to hurt anybody or anything like that, but because I have a commitment to myself to consistently be putting myself into situations of building relationships across social differences. And I can't possibly know everything about every culture that exists.
Yeah. So just one thing, Dena, if I can interrupt you, just for our listeners out there, can you give us an example of a microaggression?
Yes. So a microaggression for folks who need, who want it more well-defined, microaggressions are slights, invalidations, comments, behaviors that are made that end up having an impact on a group of people or others in the space who hear it or see it or witness it. May be targeted to one person, but typically it's based on their social group membership, their social identity, their race, their gender, their social, and the person who is doing the microaggressing usually is unaware. Right. They are doing it unintentionally. So they're not trying to be mean or offensive. If they are, by the way, that's no longer a microaggression. That's just outright racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, etc. If they're doing it from a place of, well, I didn't mean it, that's different. Then we would call it a microaggression, but that doesn't mean that they're off the hook because they didn't mean it. What matters in microaggressions is the impact much more so than the intent. So the intent is, I mean well to everybody. I'm just being nice to everyone, but you microaggress and the impact that it has can be devastating in terms of especially having these conversations. If you microaggress, people are, as I said, not only do you lose credibility as the facilitator, but you are then creating an environment where people are no longer feeling safe and will probably not engage, will probably, in fact, disengage and not come back.
Right.
And so when we think about that in terms of what microaggressions, what the damage that they can do, they might seem like a simple slight. If I were to say to a group of women, so you guys, blah, 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 blah. You know, there isn't a guy in the space. And it's become so acculturated for us to use guys to mean everyone. But if you really pull that language apart, that's coming from a very kind of a sexist perspective. Oh, we mean everyone. Do you though? Like, where did that come from? So, you know, that's one minor one. There's so many. When we say to somebody who may not have white skin, maybe a person, a BIPOC, a Black, Indigenous, or other person of color, we say to them, where are you from? And their response is, well, I'm from Wisconsin, let's say. And the microaggression comes, no, not a microaggression to ask people where they're from. The microaggression comes next when you say, no, where are you really from? Mm. You're now invalidating their experience, who they are, where they came from, what their life has been like, and saying, and by the way, if this is in the United States, well, you couldn't be from the United States because you have dark skin, so you must be from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say this is really, really serious, Dena, and I have to say from an HR perspective, I think it all starts with your initial hiring processes. And, you know, I've found myself in that place. I mean, we have had very limited terminations in my organization, but in the times that I've had to do some serious investigation to find out what you said beyond the microaggression and the inadvert commentary or the accidental commentary, to really investigate it and really analyze if somebody truly has the values and the belief that they are racist or whatever other topic you want to use, then that's where the real, you know, you need to hire slow, terminate fast, and get those people off the organization, out of the organization before it can become a complete toxicity. And I think that the blending of HR and DEI is so vital. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very vital combination to really assure you protect your organization from some of those behaviors.
Absolutely. You're talking about liability here, right?
Yes.
Yes. Very, very serious here. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very awakening when you find yourself in that circumstance and you find that someone doesn't have the values of your organization. Mm-hmm. So having your expertise or an expert like you would be so vital to really analyze, you know, what's going on behind the scenes with that person's behavior.
Yeah.
Well, this is such an important discussion, but I know we're coming towards the top of the hour, so I do want to acknowledge our sponsor, the TMA method. And so we are near and dear to the TMA method because this is the way that you can provide an assessment to your new people or your teams or your employees and not a way to completely evaluate them, but it's a way of learning to get to know one another, have discussions around work preferences and how they like to work with others and so forth, and what their passions are for the future. And so the TMA method is a way of really having those great discussions with your staff. And also, I want to make sure that we are acknowledging I inform you of our next week's guest expert. We're going to have Patty Money join us. Patty is a renowned HR expert. She's been the leader of many technology companies. She's going to be coming here to talk to us about stay interviews. Right now, we're seeing what's called the Great Resignation, as has been called in the workforce out there, where people are moving away from their current employer to find new opportunities and perhaps a different industry or whatever. There's a lot of different reasons why people are leaving. And so Patty's going to talk to us about having those important discussions to encourage people to stay in the organization. And so employers can get in front of the issue and see what is going on there. So it's going to be a great discussion. Please join us next week for that. So back to you, Dena. I mean, right now, if anybody has any questions in these final few minutes, please drop those in the chat. I know we are broadcasting on many different channels here, whether it be Zoom or LinkedIn or Twitter and so forth. But if you're on in one of those different platforms, please leave your question in that platform, and we'll come back and take a look at that, and we'll get that to Dena so she can answer that for you. So In these final few moments, Dena, thank you so much for all your expertise here. So how can people, get a hold of you, learn more about these important topics and how they can apply them to make a difference in their company?
Thank you for the opportunity. Really, denasamuels.com is probably the best way. My website is, pretty robust after all the years, and just adding, programs and activities and things that might be useful for folks. So I encourage you to not only check it out, but reach out to me if there's something, if you're struggling with something or whatever that you think I might be able to be of service around or help you with, let me know.
Thank you so much. You're a pleasure.
Great. And don't forget about Dena's books here. I think these are a great place to start. These are on your website, right, Dena?
They are also under my, and I've got resources, by the way, too, for folks who want to, more information, want to download some resources. There's handouts and all kinds of things there too, articles and whatnot. Blog, I have a blog. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So, and as we close up here, is there so Shar, in knowing that in your business, you're interacting with I know that you have a very diverse business, that of just employees and also interacting with the communities in different areas. Is there anything as far as how have you found that diversity and inclusion has really helped your business?
Well, again, I think it's very interesting in some of the populations. As a matter of fact, one of our employees actually put little stickers of diverse images on his face mask. So because he's a white Caucasian and he wanted to, demonstrate that he's accepting and he's open and he wants belonging, and people stop and say, why do you have those stickers on your face mask? It's just very fascinating, because he's like, well, I know that one of our employees is kind of a bald white male, and he says that sometimes people are kind of intimidated by him, but he's truly a teddy bear. And he wants to be accepted and belonging and people don't be afraid of him. He's not a big mean man. He's a really nice man. So we're constantly talking about this topic and acknowledging our biases and who we are. And that's why I'd love to look at your tools, Dena, because I think you could help us open up our mindset even more. And my employees really appreciate that we're so transparent and we talk about it all the time.
That's great. I know you're really living the value of the healthy employer there, Shar. So so great to hear.
We're working on it. We're not all that healthy, but we're working on it.
All right. Well, great. It looks like we have no further questions. So Dena, I just want to thank you once again for sharing your knowledge here. And it's such a pleasure to have you again on the forum.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to both of you.
Yeah, please keep in touch and we'll see you out on social media, I'm sure.
Yeah, great. Cheers. Everybody have a great week.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.